What is up, my crew? This is the Nook Podcast. My name is Stephen Murphy, and I am so honored that you are taking the time to listen today. When I first started to formulate this podcast, I made a list of people that I wanted to talk to, some friends, even some family. And then there were also some people that I only knew about through social media. You might imagine that it can be a little bit daunting to send an email or a DM to someone you've never met and ask that person to participate in something that doesn't even exist yet. One such person was Tim Shelton. He is the founder of an organization called Seek Well. Upon first glance of the Seek Well website, you might think that they are just another Christian lifestyle brand selling beanies and t-shirts. Well, I can assure you that that is not the case. There is a great heart in the people who run this organization to encourage all of us to seek God well. I am so glad that Tim was willing to talk to me about his story, and now I get to share it with my crew. So, I hope you have some good margin now to take in this great conversation with Tim Shelton. The bio on the website is relatively short in talking about how you guys got started in 2017. But, can you give me a little bit more backstory on what it looked like when what you know as Seek Well today? What was the genesis?
Yeah, there was no master plan.
What?
Essentially what happened is my wife and I, we moved from Michigan to Florida to help a really good friend plant a church. And if anybody's planted a church before, it's not exactly the easiest thing in the world to do. And, there was a period where it got really bumpy relationally and in leadership. And ultimately, what the best thing for the church was for me, the executive director of the church, to step away at kind of about 18 months in. And that was a really painful process for me. Ultimately, best thing that ever happened to me. But, it just became this sort of reorienting of everything I thought I knew about God. You called me to Florida. We moved 1,200 miles away. You knew, because you're sovereign, you knew this was going to happen. And
interesting to have the perspective to look back at it.
Yeah, right. And here I am internally destroyed.
Yeah.
Because it didn't go as planned. And so I spiraled really quickly. I was mad at a person, and then I was mad at the organization. And then very quickly it got to, I was just mad at God, and anger just sort of took over my life, almost destroyed my marriage. There's this sort of story where my wife and I had this come to Jesus moment. I call it the walk around the block. And it was really this, like, what are we doing? Is this going to work? And divorce was talked about quite a bit in that conversation. I'd love to tell you it got better quickly, but it didn't.
Yeah.
It took time, and it took a couple coming in and sort of diving in deep in our marriage and showing us what it looks like to not just know about God, but to know him deeply. And over the course of the next year or so, we decided we're going to move back to Michigan. And when I got back to Michigan, it was sort of like your world gets turned upside down because you lose your community and you're kind of starting fresh. And I kind of had gone back to some older habits and was just sort of disillusioned. And I just sort of thought, this is just too hard. Following Jesus is too difficult. And nobody knew it, because I was at that point where I was committed to my marriage, keeping my family together. I was going to be a good dad. But I literally had this thought, I'm like, maybe I'm just going to be a good dad and a good husband, but Jesus just isn't going to be part of the equation.
Wow.
And literally the next day when I had that thought, I got an email from a friend, and it just says, watch this video. And it was a video inviting young leaders into a leadership journey over 3 years that would teach them how to intimately follow Jesus. Harbor Ministries is something I'm involved with. Used to be involved with it as a volunteer, but now just a raving fan of. And went to this thing called Rhythm in 20, and they taught me how to take space with Jesus, how to get away, to slow down, and how to listen to his voice. And it quite literally was the thing missing in my life, because I knew a lot about God. I mean, I planted a church, have grown up in the church, but the intimacy with him was missing. And, just reading my Bible or just doing a devotional, just going to church, worshiping, it just wasn't getting it done. And that's not to say any of those things are bad. We need all those things in our life.
Right.
But for me, it was getting dedicated time away to spend with Jesus and to just be with him. And what I started to realize over the course of that kind of 2 or 3 year journey was that there was a lot wrong with me. I really was more broken than I thought.
Yeah.
And it, so what I started to do was I invited my best friend, Bill Holbrook, who's the executive director at Sequel, to just sort of like, hey, let's do this thing together. And I didn't know it, but he was going through his own sort of crisis. And because, just at that point, we weren't really talking about those sort of things. And we started just getting away quarterly, which I know is a long setup to what you ultimately asked, but it's important I think, to understand the backstory. We started getting away.
Yeah.
We're going to this location and we're going to do a silence and solitude retreat for 48 hours. And we just started chasing after Jesus. We use that phrase a lot at Sequel, and it's this idea, not that he can't be caught. It's just that simply Jesus is always on the move, and our job is to run to him as fast as we can, wherever he is moving, whatever he is doing. And so we just started chasing after him. What was really interesting is after about a year of that, some of our friends found out what we were doing, and they were like, hey, you think we could join you? It was like, so yeah, exactly. And it was like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, come on. Here are the rules. We put a name to it called Refresh, just because, that's what you do,
that's
I guess.
That's what you do. You got to brand it.
Right. So it became this thing called Refresh, and it was, it was the two of us, and then 3, and then 6, and then 2 or 3 years later, it was 12, and then 14. And as I was listening in 2017 at Refresh, I clearly heard Jesus just speak to me like, you're not dreaming big enough. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Exactly. And I literally said, no. I'm done professional ministry. We're I'm not, I've
been there, done that.
Right. And he just proceeded to just outline all the events of my life that brought me up to that moment, all the people I know, the connections I had, and most importantly, the experience that I've been able to be a part of guiding other guys to. And he's like, you're not the only one who needs this. And so I quickly just started to put a game plan together of, okay, what would this look like? And it just sort of took on a life of its own. And so our whole mission is to get people to slow down, to be still, like it says in scripture, to learn to listen to Jesus in the process of seeking him well. And that's our mission.
Yeah. And see, right there, that description is why I reached out to you in the first place, because I think just because of the internet algorithms, as soon as you do a search for cool Christian t-shirts one time, there's always going to be something showing up in your feed. And I don't know if it's that all those companies have always been there, or if they're just aware of me looking now. But I think that's how I first became aware of Sequel. Right. And I'm just always the curious type that I'll go do a quick deep dive to see who's doing what. And I'm a process guy. So I always like to find, kind of the story behind the story. And as soon as I started reading about what you guys were about, I was like, okay, this is different. And you can tell immediately, or at least I could. Mm-hmm. And so when the whole podcast thing started coming together and I'm starting to formulate who can I talk to that will kind of bolster my heart behind what this thing is about. It's like, I don't even need to talk if I can get Tim Shelton on the line, I'm probably not going to need to say a whole lot, because this is so much the rhythm that I have found such amazing richness in the last year and a half, 2 years of just dedicating a certain amount of time every day and guarding it as fiercely as I can, because I feel like after some time in doing that, I'm reaping the benefits of that.
Yeah,
and
he's changing your life quite literally from the inside out.
Oh yeah, and even as somebody who has been in church for a really long time, and while our stories are very different, there's a lot of similarity in there. Right. And while I don't ever imagine this podcast being some bastion of safety for people who have been in and out of ministry, there is still a certain amount of lumps that you take in ministry. And I'm still in it. You're still in it to whatever degree. But it's something you just said, I had to write it down, was interesting to me, that your breakthrough came in your brokenness. And how amazing that is.
Always the case.
Yeah. That what an amazing thing that when you felt like you had hit a rock bottom, that all of a sudden God starts saying, okay, now I can work with that. And look where it's going today.
Yeah, we use this phrase around Sequel. Just because you know a lot about God doesn't mean you know him.
Yeah.
And I think that's the state of so many of us. And I'd say us, putting myself in that category, still trying to figure things out.
Same.
And I think we all, if we're being honest, we get to this place where we've done the church thing long enough. And I love my church, active part of my church, but the church is just supposed to be a vehicle for you to explore Jesus on your own.
Yep.
And the coming together and fellowship and iron sharpening iron, all that kind of stuff. And that's beautiful. But ultimately, you've got to be the one looking in the mirror and say, am I taking ownership of my relationship with Jesus? So we use this phrase just because you know a lot about God, just because you go to church and you sing the songs and you maybe even know the scriptures. That doesn't mean you know God, because the only way to know God is to have intimacy with him. Mm-hmm. And that's not just going to come in an hour a week, or frankly, just listen to a podcast in your car or turn in on a worship music. There's got to be this back and forth dialogue, this intimate connection where you submit your brokenness to him, and then you let him do what he always does, which is restore you to who he designed you to be.
Yeah.
And we call that the deep work. You've got to engage in that sort of deeper work. And that's when you begin to really know your Heavenly Father and to know, to the best of our ability, who he is. I mean, because we cannot put him in a box. He is, I love the way Louis Giglio says it, he's otherly.
Yeah. Oh,
that's the second good. We think he's like you and us.
Yeah.
We've already messed it up, And so, it just takes that. We've got to develop that intimacy with him. And so that's why we use that phrase. I know it's sort of a bombastic phrase. It's like, we're not saying anything negative by saying that. We're just simply trying to call to people's attention the honesty in that. Just because you know a lot about him doesn't mean you know him.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I grew up Catholic, so I felt like I understood, the sticks and bricks part of it. I can tell you the story, but as far as having anything in the way of a rich relationship, that was way down the line from all that kind of stuff. And what you're saying right there is just making me realize how I think we've all gotten too good at the sticks and bricks. We can show up at church, we can punch that clock, we can participate, but when did we lose sight of a John 10:10? That to have life and have it to the full. Why do we settle for something shy of full? You'll never get to the end of it, But
Right.
you'll never even get started without those moments that you're talking about, when you allow him to go, okay, there's stuff I got to deal with you to get you past whatever, this is right now. But past this, there's so much more for you.
Yeah.
Come
But
on.
I think I think, and we're still discovering this. I think, because by the way, that is like, if there's two verses at Sequel that we just sort of hang so much on, it's that Jesus came to give us life to the full today, by the way, not when you die,
Right.
today. And then second is, if we want to experience life to the full, we've got to do it his way. And so, Matthew 11:28-30, it gives us a roadmap.
Yeah.
We've got to come to Jesus, get away with him, learn to move these unforced rhythms, these rhythms of grace. And we get on the other side of that free and light, life to the full. So, but I think what we're discovering is, what people don't realize is that there is an enemy who also has a game plan for your life.
Yep.
So Jesus says, I've come to give you life to the full. And if you do it my way, you'll get that.
Yep.
But what we fail to recognize is there's an enemy who also has a game plan. And that is to distract you from life to the full.
Yep.
And, he does that in so many different ways. But if we don't recognize,
by any means necessary,
by any means, usually by deception, that's his number one kind of tool. But if we don't think that's real, if let's start with assumptions. If we don't think that assumption is true, then that really changes our interaction and need for Jesus. If we think, that the enemy's not trying to destroy our lives, if he's not trying to pull us away from Jesus, then simply what we're left is, I just need to be a good person, do the best I can. I believe in God, and it'll all work out on the other end.
Yeah. It becomes sadly formulaic.
Right. And, I think there's some good questions to ask there about the state of our collective church. I don't mean necessarily the institution of the church, but the people, us, the body of Christ. There's some good questions to ask there. But if you believe that there is an enemy and he does want to literally destroy you, then you start to dive into, well, how is he doing this? Mm-hmm. And it's usually not these big things. It's usually way more subtle than that. Like the fact that you can't sit still without touching your phone 10 times in the course of an hour.
Yep.
Guilty, right?
Yep, exactly.
I always call it like the reach right for me, because I'm right-handed. That says something about our lives. It says, gosh, the ability to sit still is diminishing by the day. And what that is we're numbing ourselves with Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or whatever the case is.
Yep.
Like, that's a tactic of the enemy. It's small, it's subtle. He gets us to believe things that aren't true about ourselves, about the world.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, my whole point is, why aren't people experiencing life to the full? Potentially, it's because they don't really believe that the enemy wants to destroy them, that they don't believe he has a plan for their life too. But when that sort of veil falls and we start to realize that, then it's like, well, gosh, I need Jesus, and I need him now, and I need him desperately.
Right.
And that was my awakening, part of it. And we see that so many times with people who engage with Sequel, as they start to realize, like, I need Jesus desperately.
Right. And I love that you mentioned that word, because it was a word that kind of hit me a couple of years ago. And it's like, I think people's general interpretation of the word desperate sounds kind of crazed. It's like, well, I was desperate. That's the last of the last of the last kind of a thing. And it occurred to me, what if I choose to live desperately? And that doesn't mean haphazard. To me, it's much more of a consciousness. It's an awareness of, if I am absolutely desperate for God on a daily basis, that I wake up in the morning and realize I'm not going to make it today without him. And yeah, I may survive. I don't want to portray some kind of, apocalyptic sort of scenario. But if I choose to be desperate, God, I am desperate for you to do something in my life today. That changes how I'm going to interact with everybody. And especially for me, somebody who, we can make the joke about, I can't get out the door. Well, I have road rage issues. I don't struggle with road rage issues. I have mastered them. It's in those days that I don't pregame well that I will lose my temper, and I'm not 100 yards away from my house. And while that may seem somewhat small to people that just want to write that off, but it's like, well, when that's how my day starts, and then it blossoms into something else, and then it evolves into something else, and by noon, my shoulders are crawling up over my head, and I'm ready to blast the next person that looks at me sideways. I'm already so off track.
Yeah.
I don't want to live that way anymore. And there's a part of me that hates having to admit that I'm in my mid-50s before this is becoming such a priority to me. But at the same time, it's like, okay, yeah, that's embarrassing to me as someone who has professed Christianity for 35, 40 years. I'm not going to let that shy away from, or make me shy away from encouraging somebody, go deeper.
Yeah.
Find those quiet moments and dive deeper than you ever have.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting when you are faced with your own brokenness? Like when you look in the mirror and you just say, the reality is I am deficient. Yep. Boy, that just changes so much. I mean, I had this moment in Florida, going back to that story, where I sort of looked in the mirror and I said, if I don't change, here's what happens. I'm divorced. My kids grew up in a divorced household. We all know the stats with that.
Yep.
My kids are never going to trust men. I have 2 daughters. Their marriage, the way they interact with their future husband will be, it'll take them a long time in counseling to get over that. How they parent. And you just start to chase the rabbit hole. And I look back and I'm like, and that all comes back to this moment, and I am deficient.
Yeah.
And that desperateness just sort of kicked in. I'm like, I will do, not actually out of a love necessarily for even my wife at that moment, or out of a love, like I just didn't know exactly what I needed, but it was like, I can't let that happen. And so I'll do whatever it takes. And then, fortunately I knew the answers. I have to find Jesus in this somehow.
Yeah.
And that sort of desperateness welled up, and that lasted for a couple of years actually. But it's interesting what you said about desperateness, because I think there's sort of 2 sorts of desperateness. There's the type of desperateness where it is, you're on your last leg, and it's like, if I don't do something, I'm dead.
Yeah.
That's where I was at. But then I think there's this other sort of desperateness, which is the challenge for any of us who have been chasing after Jesus for some time now, which is the day-to-day, like, how do you stay hungry or desperate for Jesus? Like what you were saying, not out of a place of like, I'm lost and I'm almost, I'm on the verge of destruction, but on the sense of like, I need him today so that I don't go into road rage.
Yeah.
I need him today so I can speak kind to my kids. I need him today so I can make really good business decisions, and I need his wisdom. And I think that's the problem for, lifelong Christians, or the challenge for lifelong Christians, is at some point we just get comfortable.
Oh yeah.
We know all the stuff, and ultimately you wake up 5, 10, 20 years later and you start to realize, I know a lot about God. I just don't actually know him.
Right.
And so that's part of our mission, is to wake people up to the God that they already know a lot about, and help develop that intimacy. But it's so funny what you just said about desperateness, because that has been like a theme for me for now, at least the last couple of years. That second part of desperateness, how do we keep people desperate? How do I stay desperate?
I want to live desperate to where, even just what you were just saying right there about those aha moments of what a divorced life might look like for you and for your kids and for future generations. The grace that was granted to you in that moment to just even be aware of it, even in unawareness.
Yeah,
Is
right.
what a gift that was, because you said that there wasn't some big focus on Jesus in that moment. It was
No, but
your mess.
I think it was the Holy Spirit just nudging me and be like, "Hey, I haven't left you.
Hmm.
You're you're just not seeing things clearly." And he just gave me just that moment of, like you said, grace, that just moment of clarity to say, "Hey, I'm still in this, but I need you to be in it too."
Right.
And if you don't, I just want to give you a peek at what your life is going to look like.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I think I shared with you when we talked first that the tagline for the podcast is real life in real, or I'm sorry, real faith in real time. And that's messy. Real faith is always going to be messy. And that when the Holy Spirit shows you something like that, it's not just, look, it's pixie dust and rainbows if you
Yeah.
do it our way. It's like, no, tell you what, let me give you a peek of
Yeah.
what this fork in the road really looks like for you.
That's right. Yeah. That was just the first of like 94 of those.
Yeah, exactly.
I when I decided, like, I will do anything to find the God who loves me and have intimacy with him. I'm glad I made that decision, and that there's kind of no going back, because on the other side of it, it's like, I didn't realize he was going to just tear open everything inside of me that wasn't lining up with who he's created me to be, and who my identity is in Christ. And had I known, maybe I would have given it a second thought, but I'm glad it doesn't work that way, because that desperateness kicked in, and I'm just like, this is the only way for me.
Yeah. Well, you just made me flash on how, and I've been pretty transparent about this, is that I've been in counseling for at least a couple of years now, and I'm so grateful for an amazing Christian counselor who always points me back to God, keeps me in the Word, keeps me honest that way, that every time I felt like we had made great strides, it's like, cool, this is a good rhythm. And all of a sudden, she'd ask me something, and it would feel like I'm kind of standing in the yard going, all right, grass is mowed, trees are trimmed, everything's cool. And then she would go, well, hold on. And she would knock a fence down, and there would be another 10 acres of mess. And I thought we were done.
I know,
there's
man.
still more. And how, even as daunting as those moments feel, that desperateness kicks in of, okay, this sucks.
Yeah.
And it could suck for another chunk of time, but I'm starting to understand the richness that's on the other side of this thing, and I'll plug my nose and swallow if I have to, but let's go.
And so you're hitting on something that it's taken me years to sort of formulate, which is when people come and they say, okay, I get it, we need to know God. But then inevitably they ask the question for people who maybe aren't desperate. They haven't hit that point. Why should I listen?
Yeah.
Why should I seek him well? Why should I begin a rhythm of listening? And I think what it sort of really comes down to is, do you want to live your best life? And not this life that, is not like you're going to be rich and, not that sort of prosperity sort of gospel life type thing. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, do you want everything that God has for you, your very best life, which is a life that is wholeness, that is a life filled with joy and peace, and kindness, and, getting as close to Jesus as you possibly can be in the person he's created you to be. If you don't do that, you'll never get there.
Right.
That's it. So it's like, do you want to live in pain and destruction and kind of keep banging your head against the wall the same way you've been doing it for the last 20, 30 years? Or you want to try a new way,
right,
and do it his way. And what's interesting is the longer you do that, the more you start to realize what a beautiful process that is. And you sort of, you enjoy the process, because you just, at least for me, I just surrender more. I have this phrase I use a lot: Jesus, I want what you want. And part of it is, it's true. I have gotten to the place where I want exactly what he wants. And part of it is to remind me, just by speaking it out loud, that my job is to submit to him, is to surrender to him. And every time I say that, I just remember I do want what he wants. So that means if he's going to tear open the insides and restore me back to who he's designed me to be, then I kind of need to go there. And as you're talking about the counseling thing, I'm just thinking of some of the moments in my life where I've had that exact experience you're talking about. One of them was, I had this guy ask me one time in a counseling session. He says, "What do you already know about yourself that you don't want to know?" What do you already know about yourself that you don't want to know?
Wow. That's a sharp blade. Wow.
No, thank you. And here's the interesting thing. When you ask yourself that question, you already know.
Yep.
What
you don't have to ponder that.
No. What do you already know about yourself that you don't want to know? It's like, what are you numbing yourself to? That's that transformational process. So C.S. Lewis talks about, the whole journey is to take you from salvation to restoration. And it's this process of discovering who God has designed you to be, your unique wiring, and then allowing him to restore you back, to strip away all the junk, to restore you back to who he's created you to be. And it's a lifelong journey. And he's like, you never fully arrive.
Yep. But that should never be daunting to you. I mean,
no, exactly. Yeah. And along the way, you get life to the full. But he says in the very last line of Mere Christianity, he says, catch Jesus and you catch everything else you're looking for. I think that's like the beauty. Exactly. I think that's the beauty in this whole thing, is what we don't realize is that all the things that we actually want in life, love, joy, peace, hope, fulfillment, purpose, you get all those things when you chase after Jesus. When you find him, Scripture says, if you seek me, you will find me. If you seek him, you will find him. And when you do, you get all the things you already want anyway.
Yep. Or realize you didn't need him in the first place. Yeah. Well, that made me flash back to what you talked about in your Florida experience, and realizing that moment of understanding that you were deficient.
Yeah.
Well, deficiency doesn't fix itself. Deficiency is not a moment. Deficiency is a trend. Because if you find yourself deficient and don't do anything, you will get more deficient. Your deficiency will increase, which sounds like a double negative, or an oxymoron maybe. But deficiency will feed deficiency. And as someone who deals with depression and understands those dark spirals, don't go there. Tie a bigger knot in the end of your rope and hang on, and then start taking those steps. Which leads me to my next question. And while I would never want to portray that there's some perfect 3-step plan, for somebody who's listening to this and it's pinging them good, what are some of the practical steps that we can be taking, that we can get started on right now, to moving to that place of wholeness and restoration?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the things, like going back to our story, when we started Refresh, there was no master plan. Even when we, incorporated Sequel, we started to realize we need something for everybody. So our team took about 18 months and we wrote a book called Listen. And the subtitle is A Guided Sequel Experience. So it's the idea that if we could get with you over the course of 7 weeks and teach you to listen to Jesus, how would we do that? Yeah. So it's really part book and part experience. The first 50 or 60 pages is diving into how do you listen to Jesus. There's a process to doing that. Our process isn't the only process out there. There's some great teachers, Ruth Barton Haley, and some others that they do a really good job. But this is almost like a 101 guide.
Yeah.
How do you develop spiritual rhythm, incorporating listening into that? And so we wrote this book called Listen. It's a 7-week experience. And that's where we point people to is, hey, if you can't come to a live experience, if we don't have one that's available right now, or we've had some people in California fly across the country to come to the experience. If you don't want to do that, you can't afford a plane ticket or whatever, buy the book, dive in for 7 weeks, because at the end of 7 weeks, you will have found something that is much more valuable probably than anything else you've done spiritually in your life, because you are now sitting down every day for 7 weeks, connecting to the creator of the universe, the one who designed you on purpose with the purpose. And you're asking him to speak into your life every day.
Yeah.
For 7 weeks. I think, what do they say? Habits form in like 21 days? Mm-hmm. Something like that. I'm in the ballpark anyway. Yep. Right. So the idea was that, okay, let's extend that. It's not quite 2 months. And I think what people will find is the same thing that you and I have found in our own lives. Once you commit to a spiritual rhythm, you don't feel right without engaging with Jesus every day.
Yeah.
Like 2 days ago, I was exhausted from the night before, and I just needed sleep, and I got 8 hours sleep, and I woke up. But all throughout the day, I was like, something feels off. And it was, I didn't get up in the morning and spend time with Jesus. Now, I needed the sleep, let me just tell you.
Oh, sure.
But it's become such a part of my rhythm. And I say rhythm intentionally, not routine. Rhythm, the ongoing effortless connection I have with Jesus has become such a part of that it was like, I miss just talking to him, because what I think people will find is, as you develop that, you will develop this intimate, effortless connection with him that is probably the most valuable thing you can do for your journey with Jesus. There has to be this dynamic process of you learning what it looks like for you to engage with Jesus and do the deeper work of listening. And so we're just simply trying to give you a framework. And then, to your point, it's an experience. That's why we call it an experience, not a book.
Right.
Is because you need to experience it for yourself. Because, as we say it so often, when you hear Jesus speak, it changes everything.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, how long did you say it took to put that book together?
About 18 months. And the funny thing is, when we originally wrote it for just people coming to an experience, like, okay, you've came, now take this away and go and do this. What we started to realize was that God was crafting a much bigger story around this, where it could be something appealing for everybody who is attached to Sequel or not attached to Sequel. Like, this is a 101 experience for listening to Jesus.
Right. Well, and I feel compelled to say to my listeners that I never going to have this show be, some ultimate pitch, that we didn't have this conversation with depth and some grit to ultimately come to some kind of a sales pitch. More than anything, I always, always, always want people to walk away with something practical. And this is it. And this isn't the be all end all. And Tim, I don't think that you think that either.
No.
Something like this is a good resource for anybody who's trying to add that richness, add that depth to their own life that will set them up for that John 10:10 kind of a mindset moving forward. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take commitment. So this isn't some magic pill. This is just the beginning of your next phase, is what I hope for people.
I think, absolutely. That was the heartbeat behind it. And I think you're right. This is going to help anybody who's following Jesus learn to listen for his voice in their life.
Oh, brother, I'm so glad that you were willing to take a shot on somebody with not a whole lot to I don't have a thing to say, here's the prototype, can I build you one, on somebody you didn't know, to sit and have a conversation like this, because I absolutely believe that something like this is going to help somebody.
I think our culture and the people inside of our churches are sort of demanding this right now. They're saying, hey, I want to experience Jesus, and I want to know him at a different level. And so for me, like when you said, hey, would you like to come on and tell us a little bit about Sequel? I knew from that moment, it's like, okay, I got a kindred spirit here.
Yeah.
I got somebody who wants to chase after Jesus as well. And let's do it. Let's tell the story of what God is doing. And if sequel is a part of that, that's great. But really, God is up to something. And you can see it if you're paying attention to lots of different things out there, movements, organizations, and culture. And so that's my hope, is just to point people back to what God is doing and figure out a way to jump in on that and experience him.
This is a tough one to find just one or two takeaways, but I will try. The first one being that Tim's breakthrough happened in his brokenness. And it's amazing to have the perspective to be able to look back and know that that's where God did some deep healing work. I don't think that anyone would say that they love the feeling of being broken, but it's also very reassuring to know that that's where God will meet you, right there in the middle of it. Remind you that he loves you so much and that you have a hope and a future. And the second one would probably have to be their tagline: be still, listen, and seek well. To me, that means that to gain that deep, rich relationship with Jesus, I need to be intentional and consistent, spending time with him every day. Tim mentioned the book that they have available called Listen. It is so well written and designed so beautifully. I hope you will consider ordering one. And the bonus is that he was very gracious to offer the Nook Podcast listeners a discount. So if you follow the link down in the show notes to their website, throw that book into a cart. When you get to the checkout process, there's a line there that offers a discount code. If you just type in Nook, N-O-O-K, in that discount code line, you will receive 10% off of the Listen book. And I really hope you consider getting one. It will really help you deepen that relationship with God. Well, as always, if you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, you can reach me at one simple email address, and that's Stephen@nookpodcast.com. That's Stephen with a V at nookpodcast.com. And if you haven't joined our Facebook group, consider this your invitation. That's facebook.com/meetmeinthenook. Links for all those are down in the show notes as well. I'd love it if you shared this episode with a friend who you might think would benefit from it. And if you've got some time, I'd appreciate if you could pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave the show a good rating and a nice review. It really does help kind of get the word out about what's happening here. Thank you so much for listening today, and I will catch you here next time in the Nook. The Nook Podcast is a production of Sozo Digital Media.